Welcome everyone to I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist. And this is an episode which, Troy, you and I weren't actually planning to do, but I think when we had our chat with Philip Yancey, there was a lot of things that came up for us, weren't there? It was a really interesting chat, and I came away from it personally going, oh, that was a bit Christian-y, wasn't it? And I can't say it left me feeling uncomfortable, but it left me feeling slightly uneasy.
Yeah, totally. That's why I suggested that we do this episode, that we do a bit of a reflection on it. And we've never done that before. We've never done an episode on an episode. But it pushed a lot of buttons in me, some good, some not so good. And even listening to the recording of that episode and even being involved, obviously, in the actual recording, I just was quite, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but I was taken aback a little bit by some of my responses and the way that I was, but also the way that I wasn't.
In what way?
Well, I just think I was very positive. I was very upbeat. He's one of the, world's top evangelical authors. Mm. And I didn't ask him any really tough, hard questions. I didn't go at him at all, really. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that with you. And that may not be a bad thing, but still, it's what happened.
You know what? I reflected on this. He disarmed us without, I don't think he was consciously trying to disarm us, because I think we've said this, that when we asked him to come on the pod, very clear in the correspondence going, we are not Christians. We are ex-Evangelicals. We are not in the fold anymore, but we're not coming in from an angry place. We're coming in from a reflective place and trying to, I guess, build a good, healthy response to what happened to us. And he was like, yeah, cool, no worries, happy to come on the pod. And we asked him that, as our listeners would recollect from the episode. We asked him, why would you want to come on an Evangelical pod? And he was quite clear. He goes, I was hoping Evangelicals would read my book. He was really, really happy with that. A bit disarming.
Yeah, well, fair enough. So first question, right, that this brought up for me is, what do we do with evangelicals who are good people, right? What do we do with the ones that you just can't be angry at? And he seemed to be one of them.
Yeah, and it's really difficult. And again, this is something we asked him, but when you look, if you were to look at a profile of an evangelical now, very, very much, I think you would think in your mind, a US evangelical, very angry, Trump supporter, judgmental, wanting to lynch anybody that sins and wanting to take over the world, and incredibly politically motivated. I can't see him through that lens. Like, our conversation with him, he just didn't seem like an evangelical. It's that really uncomfortably with me that he still calls himself that, and he still is happy with that label. So I think that, for me, was part of the bit that made me feel uncomfortable. However, there are good evangelicals out there. We cannot say that they're all bad. That would be a really stupid thing to say, and it would be misrepresenting a bunch of people who do good, who are reasonable humans and are responding to the world in a loving and accepting way. So what do we do with that? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, well, I think it's a question of label. I think a lot of our listeners, and us included, would go, he's not an evangelical. He's a fucking liberal, right? Like, he's progressive, he's got gay friends, and, he's not taking a stand on abortion. And, even he said these are the two defining principles of Christianity these days, at least in America, are abortion and homosexuality. And he refuses to take a stand on either of them. So the evangelicals would be saying, sorry, you're not ticking the boxes. You're out. I mean, he's more Brian McLaren-ish and Rob Bellish than he is, Jerry Falwell-ish or Pat Robertson or whatever. And as a matter of fact, he was dissing those names. He talked about Pat Robertson and James Dobson and Jerry Falwell. He was dissing them. And Trump, 100% he was.
Yeah, he was. It was interesting. If you look back at the Frank Schaeffer episode, you look at him and Frank, you could line them up and you could see them having a good conversation. One comes from a Christian lens still, one doesn't, but they have a similar bent on things. It was really interesting.
They have more in common than they have that divides them, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yet, I mean, there was a lot of really Christian language, which I squirmed a bit.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
was,
me too. Me too. I wasn't happy with it. And I was also thinking of our audience. See, I do care about you folks out there. I was also thinking, oh God, I hope these people aren't triggering at this, because you're saying I have a relationship with God, and if you can have a relationship with God, why would you stop anything from letting you have that? And I'm thinking, shut up.
it was difficult. That was a really difficult bit to process. But you know what? I came away from that episode with even more respect than I went into it with. And I had a lot of respect for Yancey, and I came out of it going, you know what? You're a good guy. You're actually somebody that I could see as having a friendship, because I wouldn't feel threatened by him. I wouldn't feel like he's sitting there judging me or anything like that. And that is how, if Christians want to be seen in any light, that's how they should want to be seen. But most of them don't. Most of them are there trying to carve their way apart by being something completely different. And generally that ends up in just one big judgmental mess.
So it made me ask that when I read, and this is very sort of Jacques Derrida, right? That we bring our baggage to what we read. We bring our own interpretations, we bring our own lenses to what we read, and so you can read a book and I can read a book and we can have very, very different experiences from the same book, right? Because of what we bring.
Yep.
And it made me wonder, where was he at when he wrote those books compared to us? See, we read them because we were told, you can read these, you can buy this at Koorong, you can buy this at Word, you can buy this at your local Christian bookshop, so it must be okay. And then we read it and it changed us, Brian, both of
Mm.
us. I'm thinking, What's So Amazing About Grace, The Jesus I Never Knew, Disappointment with God, those kinds of books. They really did change us. And I'm wondering, were they catapults, or maybe not catapults, but at least nudges out of evangelicalism, or out of Pentecostalism, I should say, the Pentecostalism that we were in? Because he certainly wasn't coming from that perspective. But did we misunderstand where he was actually coming from? Like, he was coming, I think if we'd actually sat down and talked with him back then and heard what he really believed, we probably would have gone, oh, sorry, you're too liberal. I'm not reading your books. I'm going to burn them, which is what some people did. Even back then, they were like, oh, he's too liberal. And now I look back and go, actually, I think he was.
Yeah, I 100% think he was. And I can most definitely confirm that he nudged me out of Pentecostalism. I mean, some of it was, I read when I was out the other side, but the bits and pieces that I did read while I was still in it, they definitely fed into the questions I was having at the time, and going, hey, this shit ain't right. And his writings made sense to me. And even to this day, I think you're right. I look back on it and he was as liberal as can be.
Yeah, well, maybe not as liberal as can be, but certainly far more liberal than maybe we thought he was. But God, he had a really positive influence on us back then, didn't he? Like he just set us free.
Well, you look at a lot of his books, I mean, regardless of what the title is, the book is generally saying, hey, don't believe everything that's in front of you at your church every Sunday, because a lot of it isn't actually accurate historically or even accurate within a scriptural context. He was saying there's something else in this, and it's not the shit that you get every Sunday. So it was interesting, and he's still saying the same thing.
Yeah, exactly right. So, how do you think that atheists and agnostic audience members, right, of I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist, how do you think they responded to that episode? Do you reckon they sat there and went, no, fuck off? What's he doing on the show?
Yeah, fair chance. And if you think about, we have Brian McLaren coming on this season as well, they will probably think the same there. But we're not just trying to give a voice to those who are anti. We're trying to give a voice to those who we see as possibly bringing in a different way of thinking. And we want to challenge ourselves as much as challenge our listeners as well. So let's not be an echo chamber and just feed that confirmation bias. You're never going to grow as a human being. So how would the agnostics or atheists respond? Well, the guy was a Christian, so they probably wouldn't like it. But could you argue with some of his life wisdom? Take out the Christianese, take out any of that stuff that he was talking about, Jesus or God or whatever. He has some good wisdom, life wisdom. Like we're trying to in the podcast, find the good stuff. There's always going to be some good stuff, even if you have to dig around a bit deeper on some things.
But were we too accommodating? Did we fanboy him too much? Was it, was it like meeting Eddie Van Halen or something? Because he was such an influence on me when I was 14. Is that what that was like? Do you think we were a little bit too accommodating, or did we ask the right questions?
Look, if Philip could play guitar, I would have fanboyed more, just like Eddie Van Halen. But maybe I'm not seeing it in the way that others saw it. But I don't think we fanboyed too much. I don't think that we asked any incredibly hard, difficult questions. But we did ask him, and we challenged him on a couple of areas of why still use the label, all that sort of stuff. I mean, we weren't going to go in and go, why are you a Christian? Because we're not that sort of podcast. So if people want that angry mob sort of mentality, you probably listen to the wrong podcast anyway.
Yeah, there are other podcasts that will do that, aren't there? So he said he was still, in air quotes, theologically conservative, but then didn't open up what that was. And again, I'm not going to speculate, but that triggered me when he said that he was theologically conservative. I was like, oh, shut up.
Yeah, and I wonder what that even means. I mean, this is coming from a guy who's just talked about one of his 5 best friends as gay, come out as gay, who was a pastor, and he considered him one of the best people to be around. Generally, if you're theologically conservative or deep in the evangelical space, then you don't generally hear too many people saying that.
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, we didn't unpack it, and who knows? He may be, deity of Christ, virgin birth. I don't know. We didn't go there, and so let's not. But the other thing that stuck out to me. Do you remember at one point I sort of juxtaposed his mother with his brother and said, there was this middle way and everything, and then he turned around and said, "Yeah, really good insight, Troy."
Yes.
And at that moment, I got so chuffed that Philip Yancey said that I had really good insight, right?
Absolutely.
And I got really, and then I thought to myself, look at me, Pastor, look over here, look at me, I've got really good insight. And I thought to myself, ooh, is that I don't think that's a good thing. Like I think I need to be a little bit, like instead of being 14 or, 19 or whatever, it's like 52 years old. And yeah, do you get what I'm saying? That and this is what I'm asking about. Did we tap back into who we were then? In some, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Maybe so, but even I mean, I would have been pretty chuffed if he had said that to me too. So I mean, I think that's something that is relatively normal. I don't think it's good or it's bad. I think it's a relatively normal thing to do, as long as you don't then try and pull that forward and go, you're 73 years old with your grandchildren on your lap going, that time Philip Yancey said that I had good insight. It was an amazing time in my life. I mean, it's all within the context of us recording a podcast with him, and he said that. And I think that, it's great that he did that. And it's great that he called that out. And I think you're grounded enough to not then build a ministry on that. So that is okay. Or maybe you will build a ministry. I'm not going to judge either way.
It's called Insightful with Philip Yancey. That's what I'm going to call it. But look, man, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's this need, like all of a sudden there was this evangelical hero on the end of a call, and he's calling me insightful, and I'm getting, I don't know, I just felt wrong about that. I just felt like it's like, come on, But I was chuffed. I was like, yes, that's right. Thanks, Uncle Phil.
You felt a little bit dirty from being chuffed. And
yeah, I totally did. Yeah. Not a little bit, very.
But look, I think that's okay. And I don't know. That sits completely comfortably with me. I'm not fazed by that, but I completely understand how you would feel uncomfortable for feeling that way. But he was fun to interview, and there's a lot of good stuff in it. So,
okay, I got another question for you.
Go.
Is then moderate evangelicalism an okay, and I want to really stress that moderate, bordering on liberal, right? Is moderate evangelicalism an okay place post fundamentalism, or not?
Look, from my perspective, I'll probably still judge you. I mean, for me, the Christian story narrative doesn't ring true to me. It's not there, and I'm not quite sure. Personally, if someone was to say to me, "Oh, that's where I've landed," I'd go, "That's cool, no worries, as long as you're not a judgmental prick and don't try
As
and
long as you've
preach
got
to
gay
me."
friends and don't take a stand on abortion
Yeah, that's right. Then you can be my friend.
and write a
But
book and tell me I'm insightful.
25 books.
Yeah.
But yeah, look for me, I'm not really phased. If that's where people want to land in the end, that's okay. And maybe it is a better place than fundamentalism, where that judgment really sits. But for me, being an evangelical, it still sits uncomfortably with me. That label particularly sits uncomfortably with me, and I think some of that is definitely the hangover of the Trump era and what we really saw rise up in that, but also what we've seen in Australia. And we've seen it with our Prime Minister, that he's a Pentecostal. He's got a big evangelical following, and people follow him because he is a Christian, and a very loud and proud Christian. I have an issue with that because personally, I think he's a shit leader and he's one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. He's hollow, but you get people voting for him because he's a Christian. So I do have an issue with that sort of evangelicalism that really doesn't encourage any independent thinking.
But if someone joined our Facebook group, for example, and
Yeah.
started to say, "Oh, no, I believe that Jesus died and rose again, and I believe that there was a virgin birth, and I believe that the Bible is the inspired word of God," and I don't reckon we'd be too tolerant of that in our group.
Possibly not, but you know what? There's 400 odd people in that group, and I'm sure that there's probably only a handful. We've never seen more than maybe 50, 60 different people comment. I'm sure there's people lurking there that do believe that. And for them, that's okay. Like, just don't come in and preach it. Like, don't come in because you will trigger people. Don't come in and dump that. And that's not what the podcast is about. It's not, it's a podcast for everybody and anybody. I think that there has to be a middle ground there, and we don't tolerate people coming in and being angry and pitchfork carrying, and we do moderate that. Some of you listening may have been subject to some of that moderation before, but we do that because a mood can swing really easy in a big group, and if you've got half a dozen people coming in angry and shouting and trying to influence something one way, it can swing that way, and doubly
But we
so.
that to both sides of the fence, right? Whether you're, if you're a venom spitting atheist or a venom spitting Christian, we'll censor you both.
Absolutely, and that's what I was going to say next. Is that if you came in the other way, we'll do the same, and you may have been subject to that as well. And some of that sits uncomfortably with me because I think I don't want to censor people, but I also see how damaging some of that narrative can be when we do let it run away and get to that place. I mean, you would just cast your mind back a couple of weeks ago when we recorded that special episode about the response to Brian Houston and all the stuff that came out in the news. It was the same sort of thing. We're trying to moderate the conversation and have a bit of grace and respect for each other.
Yeah, and I think it's key that you use that word moderate rather than censor. We're
Yeah.
trying to sort of steer the tone and maintain the tone for sure. Another question then, he called us bridge builders. He said that he sees himself as a bridge builder, and he said that we were bridge builders. How did you respond to that? Did you think that was true?
Yeah, I do. That's something I wear with pride. I don't see myself as someone who is agnostic and doesn't believe left or right and sits in the middle and doesn't declare what they believe. I mean, we've declared what we believe here on the podcast many times, but there's an art in sitting in the middle in a way that you are comfortable with either side of the conversation, as long as it's not a shouty conversation where everybody is abusing each other, because there's a real value in being a bridge builder. If you can actually have an ability to communicate and remain open to both sides, then it's a hugely powerful thing, because this is how wars start. We're seeing this in the Ukraine and Russia at the moment. You've got two sides yelling at each other and at war with each other, much worse than yelling, of course. Who comes in? Other countries try and come in and they try and bring peace to the situation, and they don't do it by saying, you're wrong, you're wrong. They come in to go, hey, how can we find a middle ground here? Something you can agree with, something that all parties can agree with, and that's where we land. I think that's what we try and do through the podcast. We try and find a place where we can find commonality, that we can find somewhere where people can be safe in saying what they're saying, being what they're being, doing what they're doing, as long as it's not damaging to others. So being a bridge builder, I really like that. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good thing. I was talking to a rabbi, some years ago now, with all that COVID haze. It could have been yesterday, but some years ago, and he,
Did he walk into a bar with a priest? No,
a
okay.
rabbi and a priest, yeah, walked into a bar. No, I was talking to this rabbi, and he's a progressive rabbi, right? So they are, like basically the Uniting Church of Judaism, right? They're just very many parts kind of thing. And so what he was saying to me is, he said, he believes in God, but not in a sort of, super defined Orthodox Jewish perspective, right?
Yep.
But he was saying that it's like a mountain, that life or existence is like a mountain, and we're all climbing to the top, and there are many paths. It's that old, many paths to God kind of thing. And he was saying that, Judaism is one path, and all the different kinds of Judaism are their own paths. And, there's different kinds of, paths for Christianity and different kinds of paths for secular humanism. He would even include, non-religious paths that we're all, whether we believe it or not, we're all ultimately heading towards God, or heading towards the universe, or heading towards enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. And that we're all heading that way. And he said, for a long time, people can walk the Christian path, and then they can change paths and, go a moderate Islamist path, or go a moderate, Judaistic path, or go a secular humanism path, or whatever. But as long as they're heading up the mountain. And I've met a lot of people over the years now who I have found, I'm going to call them spirit people. Like I guess I define myself now as an agnostic, in the sense that I'm not hardcore anti-theist, and I'm not hardcore theist either. I really don't know. And being at peace with the I don't know. So we're all heading up this mountain. And, whether you think you're heading towards God, or whether you think you're just heading towards enlightenment, or whether you think you're heading towards just, some sort of perfection in this lifetime, doesn't matter. And so that's what I'm asking. Should we throw moderate, gentle, Philip Yancey style evangelical as one of these paths? Can we say that that is an okay path to be on? It's not a path that you and I have chosen, but is it an okay path? Or are we saying, actually, it's still quite damaging because these doctrines are crazy, and, like we would Orthodox Judaism, or like we would fundamentalist Islam? Is it okay, do you think?
It sits comfortably with me, with a slight disclaimer. Don't preach to me. Don't try and convert me to that. That's okay for you to be like that, which I think makes it difficult, because evangelical, their position is to evangelize. So it is to spread the good news, it is to bring it to others. So that's the bit for me that sort of sits uncomfortably. But Philip Yancey's brand of it, or expression of it, didn't seem to offend me. And, I know we only got a small bite of it. We got an hour of Philip. But also reading his books, I never felt like the guy was never a pastor. He was never a pastor of a church. He considered himself a journalist and an author. And I think that he does that really well. And he does seem to bring a reasonably balanced view. However, he does believe that he's an evangelical, that he is a Christian, he's a card carrying Christian, and whatever that comes with, that he wears that loud and proud. I'm not overly offended by it, because I still have good friends who are Christians. I have good friends who are evangelicals. I still have friends that go to Pentecostal churches. Very few of them, and they're not people that I really catch up with often, but they don't offend me because they know where I stand. They don't try and bring me into the fold. They know that that's something that's not for me anymore. So I can still have friends in that space. How deep I could have those friendships, I don't really know. I mean, could you see yourself being a friend of an evangelical or Pentecostal?
Not a close friend. No. And oftentimes they can't be friends with me either.
No, no, that's absolutely true. So, I mean, it's pretty rare. And it's interesting, you talk about progressives, and you talk about Brian McLaren, you see as, very much many paths, one mountain sort of response. And he's a Christian Very much so. I've listened to a couple of episodes of podcasts recently with him on it, and it triggered me more than actually listening to Philip Yancey. Like, he definitely speaks a lot more of the Christianese, and maybe it was the context of the podcasts I listened to him on. But again, I see I can listen to them without really being triggered, because I think for me, I'm comfortable where I've landed. I'm comfortable where I am. I'll continue to keep shifting. I'll continue to evolve. And I don't know how that'll look in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years. But I'm also comfortable with shifting in what I believe.
I got distracted before. So coming back to that, and it resonates with what you're saying. I was talking about these spirit people. And I've taken that label. I know other people might use it in other ways. But in my journeying, I have been reading or listening to podcasts or listening to audio books or whatever it is. And I have connected with people from these varying traditions. And yet they all seem to have this same sort of vibe that sort of comes out with them. So one is Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese Buddhist teacher. Another one is the Dalai Lama, right? You read some of his stuff. Another one is Brian McLaren. Another one is Richard Rohr. Another one is Sharon Brous, who's Rabbi Sharon Brous, female rabbi. I I seem to connect with these people, and they all seem to have a religious bent, but it's this many paths thing, right? But they're all ultimately saying the same thing as each other, which is just this: love one another, be better people, express love to yourself, be true to, all this kind of stuff, regardless of those dogmas. That's what I mean about the one mountain, many paths, right? I can sit there and listen to Brian McLaren or Richard Rohr, even though they're using a Christian framework, and I'll trigger a little bit at times some of the things that they say, but most of it, I just think this is goodness. Or I listen to, like I said, Rabbi Sharon Brous from Ikar in Los Angeles, right? It's a synagogue, and listen to the stuff that she's saying. And it's just goodness. And I draw it out. None of those people, I think, are going to get hung up on these dogmas of their framework that they've chosen. And I guess that's what I'm saying, is that these many paths, these many frameworks, these spirit people that seem to come from these different frameworks, whether it's a Buddhist framework, whether it's an Hebrew framework, whether it's a Christian framework, but they're all saying the same kind of thing. And I really like that. And when I was a fundamentalist, I would have said, "Oh, you're just a new ager. You're just synchronistic, taking everything in." And I would have totally torn into myself. And yet now I look at that and I think this is a nice way to be. And Brian McLaren, in his new book, Should I Stay Christian, or whatever it's called, when we get him on, we're going to talk about it. But I read that book in preparation for his interview, and he talks about expressions of secular humanism being the same thing. So it is this one path, one mountain, many paths, and that's how I see Philip Yancey. Right, I really do. In sitting there talking to him, I'm thinking, you're another one of these cats. You're another one of these characters, and you're doing that in that framework called, conservative evangelicalism, or even moderate evangelicalism. But the message seems to be the same, which is, oh, calm down and be good to one another.
Yeah, I agree. And even if you think back to our Ange Barker episode, we love Ange. And we put the challenge to her and said, are you really saying it's one mountain, many paths? And she's like, oh, no, no, no. I just believe that, God can speak to you anywhere you are.
I'm just going to run a Buddhist funeral.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
But it's not one path, one mountain, many paths. However, look at all these different paths that I'm going to celebrate.
Yeah, come on, Ange. You're a progressive.
Yeah, fucking liberal. Do you know? Can I just say something too while we got this point?
Yeah.
I think that Christians don't want to use the word liberal when they become liberal, because it's like built into them and they're whole evangelical. Like, this is the ultimate badness. If you become this, you have completely lost your shit. And I think that even though, quacks like a duck, walks like when we got to the cult thing, I think these people are totally small L liberal, but they don't want to take that label because of what it means for years and years of working against becoming a liberal. So they've just used this new term called progressive. That's basically what they've done.
Do you think it's sort of going back to the bridge builder stuff though? Like if Philip Yancey sees himself as a bridge builder, and I think Frank Schaeffer may have even said a similar sort of thing as well around bridge building. I don't know, maybe I made that up. But if you make yourself a liberal, then it's hard to be a bridge builder. It's hard to sit in the middle place there because you're certainly labelling yourself. But I guess you're doing that being an evangelical too. So
Yeah, well,
maybe
that's
I'm
what I was
just
thinking. So what about the Liberals? Like, who's building bridges to them?
yeah, fuck them. They can burn.
Yeah, so I do think that there's a lot of liberals in evangelical clothing,
Yeah,
that are out there saying, "Yeah, yeah, I'm an evangelical," but actually you're just holding on. It's like when my faith sort of evaporated, right? And I liken it to that, and I said that on the when we were talking with the Jehovah's Witnesses. What should I think about? The ex Jehovah's Witnesses on that podcast, and I
yeah,
said it's like tooth decay. It's like you've got the outer shell, but inside the tooth is rotten, and it needs to be yanked out. But it looks good from the outside, and I think that's how I was with my Christian faith. I was telling people that I was still a Christian, but actually it was all gone. And then one
yeah.
day I went, oh, tap tap, crumbled, it's gone. And I think that's how some of these folks are with the evangelical label. I think that they don't allow themselves to actually step out because they've been told for decades, half a century, even some people, that you're not allowed to take that label. So they just dance around it and they take every other label and call themselves progressives or whatever they want to call themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you talk about Richard Raw before. I mean, Philip certainly spoke about Richard Raw a bit, and he's a Franciscan progressive. How do you talk about that and hang your hat on a label of evangelicalism? I mean, how does he reconcile that? And does it serve him well? I mean, all those sort of things. Or do you think that he's just trying to wrestle back the label of evangelicalism because it's been hijacked by a bunch of lunatics, really, in the last decade in particular? Do you think he's trying to reclaim evangelicalism as a label by bringing in some progressive ideas? I don't know. What do you think he's doing with that?
I don't think he's reclaiming it. I think he's never let it go.
Yeah,
I think he's trying to hold on to it. But as soon as he said that people on his Facebook page give him shit because of Richard Raw, I was thinking, that's because you're a fucking progressive, right? As soon as
yeah,
he said Richard Raw, I was like, okay, tick. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're not taking a stand on homosexuality, you're not taking a stand on abortion, and now you're listening and reading Richard Raw. Do you know what I mean? Like, hello, you're Rob Bell. That's who
yeah,
you are. You just haven't, published a book declaring it, kind of thing. So no, I don't think that he's trying to reclaim the label, but I think he's trying to hold on to it. But he did say, do you remember? He said, if it does shift to the point where I have to jettison the label, then I will. He actually
yeah,
said that. He doesn't want to, but he
yeah.
will.
Yeah, that's where his loyalty lays, isn't it? It's with the actions.
Yeah,
So
but he's
he's
70 something, right? He doesn't have to do anything. He can just, hold on to it and, one day pass over and cross over, and then that's that. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. And ultimately it doesn't matter. And that's what I meant about, do we say that sort of Philip Yancey moderate, see, he's calling himself a moderate evangelical, but really we're seeing him, and you and I are sitting here saying actually he's a liberal progressive. So coming back to that question, is moderate evangelicalism really an acceptable landing place post fundamentalism? My answer to that is no. I don't think
mhm.
it is. But I don't think that Philip Yancey is a moderate evangelical. I think he's a liberal.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you look at a lot of the stuff he said, and one of the things that stood out to me, I remember, is he talked about legislating morality is not the way forward, which evangelicalism is trying to do now, but living and leading is the way to do it. And this is in opposition to modern evangelicalism. So for me, it's really hard. How can you be in opposition to this sort of Christianity? And again, as you say, it's because it's progressive. It's not evangelicalism as we've come to know it.
There's a couple of ways that people go that I've seen. You've got the sort of, completely walk away, which is us, sorry, this is great. Thank you very much, but we're done. Then you've got that sort of progressive and people try and hold on to some semblance. But there's another one, which we haven't really talked about. And I saw this from an ex-minister. Well, he's actually still a minister, but he was my pastor once upon a time. And he says, I'm not an evangelical anymore. I now subscribe to historical Christianity. And when you dig, they're all evangelical doctrines. He
Yep.
still holds to Trinity, divinity of Christ, inspiration of Scripture, virgin birth, return of Jesus, literal hell, all this. But he's saying, oh, I don't want to be the the evangelical because of all the Trumpisms and all that kind of thing. But I want to hold all those, what Philip Yancey meant when he said theologically conservative, but he's holding all those doctrines. He says, I'm not an evangelical anymore. I am I believe in historical Christianity, but it's double talk. And we actually had some words. We got a bit heated with each other, this ex-minister and I, or this minister and I, because I said to him, I said, dude, you are just an evangelical in liberal clothing. Sort of the reverse of what I said before. You're trying to put out this picture that you're very tolerant and accepting, etc., but actually you're trying to bring people into that narrow path and conform them to a set of beliefs, and it's believism. You
Yep.
must believe these things to be part of our club. And he's still doing it, but he doesn't say that he's an evangelical anymore. Now he says, air quotes, historical Christian. Same, right? And I don't think that that's actually deconstructed. You can't reconstruct unless you've deconstructed. And I don't think that's a valid path. Now, people may judge that and say, who are you to say? I'm saying from my perspective, I don't think it's a valid path post-fundamentalism because it's still fundamentalist is what it is.
That's a great thing about a podcast. We can have our opinions. You can agree with them, not agree with them. That's okay. I mean, everyone has their opinions. It's just that ours go out on a
It's just that ours are
podcast.
right.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
what it is.
That's right. But look, another thing that you read this book, Where the Light Fell, and even the conversations that we had with Philip, he spoke about that he really set up a really hard shell for himself. That's how he survived. That's how he got through. He bunkered down, he pulled his head inside his shell, and he just went forward. And I got to thinking, did I do this? Did we do this? Is this something that we did? I think we did in some sort of way.
When do you think we did that? You tell me.
I reckon there's different times. Like if I think of when I started to question, and you couldn't talk about it, what did you do? You just retreated in your shell. You just went forward. You carried your questions with you. You carried your doubts with you because you can't talk about that. There's no safe place to do it. I think also I did it when I decided finally that I no longer was a Christian. That was definitely something that I just bunkered down. I put up a hard shell and I pushed people away. I didn't want to hear either side. I didn't give a shit. I couldn't sit in that middle place. I do think coming out the other side of that, and I can definitely say I'm well outside the other side of that. It makes you a better person. It makes you a more balanced person when you can actually reflect on it. But did I need to do it? Did I need to live inside that hard shell to become a more evolved and better person? Maybe, maybe not. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I remember Fiona Newton saying that she just parked it all for a while.
Yeah.
When I left church in 99, I didn't want to know anything about church or anybody from church. Gosh, it must have been 4 or 5 years, and I just cut it all off and just completely walked away from it all. I don't know if that was pulling into I mean, it definitely was pulling into a shell, but I don't know that that made me resilient. I think that, I drank a lot and partied a lot and just
Mm.
switched off from it, that I just didn't deal with it. And in that sense, I don't think that that was necessarily healthy for me. So I don't know that I did that in the way that you and Philip Yancey described that. I think for me it was, it was more just maladaptive coping strategies. I just basically withdrew and got drunk until I was ready to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, similar. I think mostly similar. And like a lot of the stuff that we look back to when we have conversations, we certainly didn't frame it that way at the time. You're only looking back in hindsight and go, did I do that? And, did it make us more resilient? Did it damage us? Bit of both for me, like a bit of both. I mean, I could have dealt with it better. We can always deal with things better. You don't need to, my opinion is, you don't need to retreat within a shell. If you're actually in a bit of a healthier headspace and got the supports around you that you can actually work through that without retreating in, That's a far, far better way to do it. But sometimes you don't have those supports around you. You don't have a healthy environment. So the shell is the only safe place that you can retreat to. So I'm comfortable that I did that. I'm comfortable that it damaged me at the time, but probably made me more resilient in the long run because I have been able to process. I have been able to continue the processing, which I'll continue till the day I am 6 feet under. So that's the reality of it for me.
Yeah, look, I think ultimately we came to a much better place for sure. I'm just thinking about that time when I did retreat into that shell. I don't know that that was such a good thing, but I hear you. Ultimately, it brought us to a good place. Hey, the other thing I want to bring up is that he talked about David Brooks's book, The Second Mountain.
Yeah.
And you know me, a book, what book? Let's read it. I thought, okay, this is a New York Times author, a New York Times writer, rather than a Christian book. So I looked it up, and there's two books that David Brooks has written a few, but there was two in particular. One is called The Road to Character,
Yeah.
and the other one is called The Second Mountain. Second Mountain I haven't read yet. I've gone to my local library. Luckily, it was there, saved me the money. The other one, The Road to Character, was available. So I started to read that. And what he's done is he's basically bringing reasons to be good. Like here's why character is a good thing, and here's why you should pursue character. But he's coming at it from a not purely from a secular perspective, but a sort of a more tolerant, so yes, secular perspectives, yes, religious perspectives, all these, and he in the Road to Character, he's showing different people throughout history who have been flawed, but who have also pursued character. So far I've read about Dwight Eisenhower, Dorothy Day, and other people. It's very, very interesting. And I really liked that Philip Yancey did that. He talked about these, resume virtues and eulogy virtues. Remember, he talked about, and
Yeah.
some is, our world is saying to us, use the resume virtues, which is, I'm insightful and I can, public speaking and all those kinds of things. And then you've got those eulogy virtues, being a good person, loving your family, credibility, or not credibility, excuse me, integrity. That was something else that I really drew from him. Now, what I thought was good about that was he's not just drawing from the Bible. He's actually drawing from other authors, other writers. He's actually drawing from secularism. And I think that's what also makes Philip Yancey more rounded rather than
Mhm.
just the fundamentalist saying the Bible says. He did say that the Bible says, but he also said David Brooks said. He also said, Richard Rohr says. He's coming from this sort of well-rounded place. And so, yeah, I did, that was one of the things I got from that interview. I actually went away and started reading that book, and it's quite a good book, but it's warts and all,
Yeah.
100% warts and all book. So I do want to recommend those David Brooks books to our listeners because they are worth checking out.
We've landed in a place where we believe that Philip Yancey is a progressive, even if he doesn't believe it.
And he's a good guy.
Yeah, he is. He's,
We talked to him for an hour, but he's a good guy. You see it in his writing. You see it in the conversation we had with him. He's a good guy, and yet he carries that label. So, what do we do with evangelicals who are seemingly good people? What do you do, Brian?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I can sit comfortably with it. But could they be my close friends? I don't know. I don't know. Really depends how they act towards me. For me, it's about actions, and a lot of those actions come out of your core beliefs as well. So, what do we do with them? Well, we treat them like everyone else. I mean, there's some good in it. Again, the whole situation with Brian Houston and what's going on there. Underneath that, there's a person, and I want to see the person there and value the person. I don't want to be someone who judges someone because of their beliefs. It's just that doesn't sit comfortably with me. My judgment of people, because we all have judgment, is around people's actions and the things that they leave behind. Those things that I guess are the footprints of their life or the fingerprints of their life. I mean, they're the stuff, that's the eulogy stuff. What did people really leave behind? What was their influence? They're the things that matter to me. How about you? What do you reckon about it?
Yeah, well, I think the world is such a polarized place at the moment, politically left and right. And,
Mm,
the Christians want to frame it as, Christians and non-Christians, but it's actually not. They've got more in common with people that they wouldn't necessarily align themselves with. It's really this sort of left and right political polarization. And so coming back to what Philip Yancey said about building bridges, and I agree. if I could have good relationships with some of these Pentecostal people, even the ones that hurt me, I reckon I would. I really reckon I would. I reckon I'd be like, okay, I'll forgive you. I don't want to overshare, but I had, issues growing up with my family. And in the 90s, we had it out as a
Yeah.
family. We really had it out and we told each other, and really some uncomfortable truths were said. And then from that point, I had the best relationship with my parents in particular, that it had always been sort of rocky, and after that just adored one another, still do. And so it was healthy to get it out, but it was also healthy to then make peace. And that's how I would like to ultimately be with my Pentecostal experience. I would like to ultimately be at peace. I don't think I'm quite there, and I don't know if the Pentecostal world will even ever allow that to happen, especially we do these podcasts and call shit out and everything. But ultimately I would like to. But you've got to get it out and you've got to say it. You can't just peace at all costs. And remember, you even said that to him, to Philip Yancey, about peace at all costs. He goes, I don't know I'd go as far as to say peace at all costs, but peace where we can is a good thing. And to quote the Bible, sorry, people, get ready for a trigger alert. What does Paul say? So Paul says, do your best to be as far as humanly possible, or as far as possible, do your best to be at peace with all men. And
Yeah.
I think that, and that's true of Buddhism as well. Buddhism says exactly the same thing. And I dare say you're going to find verses in other world religion texts. I think it's a good place to be. As much as it's possible, do your best to be at peace with all men and women and women.
Yeah, look, I agree, and I think in the end, the most important thing is you've got to be comfortable with yourself, your actions, and your responses to them. And if you have unhealthy responses to things, then you've got to look inside first and go, why am I responding in such a negative or a triggering way? And there could be some very valid reasons and very real reasons for that. And also, some of it may be justified, some of it may not be, and you've got to dig deep yourself. There has to be some personal responsibility around this stuff, and let's commit to doing that, growing together as individuals and as communities, trying to be our best versions of ourselves that we can be.
So to our audience, to the atheists, welcome. To the agnostics, welcome. I'm one of you. To the progressive Christians, welcome. To the I don't knows, welcome. What they call them, the duns, the nuns, welcome.
Yeah.
No matter where you are, welcome to this podcast. But if you're going to say my position is the only position and no other position is valid, then maybe this isn't the place for you. But that being said, hang around as long as you want. And even those of you that are still Pentecostals and still evangelicals and asking the questions, definitely welcome. Come and be a part of what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, if your truth is the only truth, then you're still a fundamentalist. Doesn't matter of what, you're still a fundamentalist. So means I am a teenage fundamentalist or I am an adult fundamentalist, but it's certainly not what we are and we landed. But I don't think there'd be too many people listening or in the Facebook group or Twitter community that we have that would be of that stance. But if you are, have a good look at where you're at.
Yeah, cool. All right, mate. I'll see you next week.
Later.